fellow veterans, spouses, and guests. Our special speaker this evening is retired United States Marine Corps Colonel Robert Bob Springer. Bob grew up here in Ashland and graduated from Ashland High School in 1960. He received a commission in the United States Marine Corps following his graduation from the Annapolis Naval Academy in 1964. He is also a graduate of the United States Postgraduate School. He is both a former astronaut serving on the 1989 Space Shuttle Discovery and the 1990 Space Shuttle Atlantis, as well as what brings him here tonight, a two-tour Vietnam veteran. During his 2 tours in Vietnam, Bob flew over 300 combat missions in the F-4 Phantom fighter jets, in addition to over 250 combat missions in the O-1 Bird Dog spotter planes and the UH-1 Huey Helicopters. While in Vietnam, Colonel Springer, a highly decorated Vietnam veteran, was the recipient of numerous medals and commendations. He earned the Navy Distinguished Flying Cross on February 4th, 1968, when his exceptional aeronautic skill allowed him to successfully assist with an air attack on a group of enemy Vietnamese soldiers who pinned down a U.S. platoon-sized patrol unit on the ground. While operating his F-4 Phantom, he was able to accomplish this despite an extremely low cloud layer which caused poor visibility. Colonel Springer has numerous other education credentials and military experiences, to include graduating from the Navy Flight Weapons School, now referred to as Top Gun. By the time Colonel Springer retired, he had logged 237 hours in space, 4,500 hours of flying time, including 3,500 hours in jet aircraft. Please join me in welcoming one of our own, a 2-tour Vietnam veteran, retired Colonel Robert Bob Springer.
Thank you very much, Greg, and thank you everybody for being here. It's truly an honor to come back. You know, this is a double homecoming for me, if you will, because I grew up in Ashland and don't get back that often. So it's a chance to come back and see friends and people I haven't seen for a while. And of course, the purpose of tonight's welcome home to our Vietnam vets. So it's really important to me and a real honor to be here to do this. I'm not going to go through all the names again, but I certainly do want to thank Greg and the whole team of people who worked so hard to put this together. It's been a challenge, I can tell you, and so I'm really absolutely delighted to have been able to participate and be a part of what's going on. As part of this trip, I was actually asked to go to the high school as well and speak to the high school students a little bit about how all this relates together and to promote a theme that I've tried to use up at the high school a little bit with the students as I've talked to them over the years, to seize your opportunities. And I'll offer that to everybody, because you know, as you go through life, you never know what's going to happen. You never know the good things that are likely to happen to you. But you've got to keep your mind open to those opportunities that are there and be able to take advantage of it. And I encourage the students to do that and framed it in the reference of, you know, something that we're all familiar with here, that, you know, the things that we fought for in the military in Vietnam, those are the same principles and ideas that we had when this country was founded. So, you know, not a new concept, but the being able to work hard, to serve and sacrifice to maintain the kinds of freedoms that we have today. And as I was talking to the students about that, and I was framing in my mind the fact that I was going to ask the question, so how many of you have, and I was going to say parents, and it dawned on me, it would be at the best grandparents that were I was really referring to in there. So hard to sometimes put yourself into a time frame perspective. But I did want to tell them to think about that in terms of opportunities as they're going through their formative years in high school and get ready to embark on careers, and offer up the fact that serving our nation in the military is certainly an honorable way and something that they could be very proud of. I certainly take pride of it. Now, if you take a look at the slide up there, one of the things I'm going to kind of point to is I had a wonderful career in the military, and you probably might ask yourself someplace along the line, so how did you get from the picture on the left-hand side of the screen to the picture on the right-hand side of the screen? So there was a few years of experience built into that. So I said, left here and graduated the class of 1960. I've got a couple of classmates here tonight. Raise your hands, folks that are. Thank you. It was as we graduated, and I had an opportunity. I'm going to use that word a lot tonight to be able to go to the Naval Academy. It didn't happen just all that easily. I knew as I was approaching my senior year in high school that I wanted to go to college. I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do, but I knew I had to get a scholarship. The family was not going to be able to support my educational goals, so getting a scholarship was very important, and I had initially applied for and received a Navy ROTC scholarship to go to another school. And during the interview for that scholarship program, one of the interviewing Navy officers said, "Are you interested in a career in the Navy?" And I've got to tell you, none of my family has served in the military, and I could spell Navy, but that was about as close as I got at that point in time. But I realized, being the astute fellow that I am, that the correct answer to his question, "Are you interested in a career in the Navy?" was probably yes. Okay, I was going to do that. And he said, "Well, how about would you consider going to the Naval Academy?" I said, "Well, yes, sir. I certainly would." And I put that aside and kind of, well, okay, I'm going to make my plans to go ahead and go to the Navy ROTC program. About 2 nights later, at home, I got a phone call from our local congressional representative. He said, "Hey, I understand you're interested in going to the Naval Academy." And I have no idea how that connection was made. To this day, I do not know how our congressional representative knew that, but it happened. And I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Well," he said, I do a nomination based on merit, and the slate is still open." And he said, "This is awfully late. This is in January of my senior year in high school." He said, "But if you can arrange to take the standard the SAT test and score well enough, whoever scores highest on that will get my nomination for the Naval Academy." So I had to really get going in a hurry. I basically had this much of a window. In fact, it was so close to be able to take that SAT test that I showed up at Worcester High School on the morning of the test. At that point, when I opened the door there, I did not know whether I'd be able to take the test or not. And a telegram arrived that morning that said you're eligible for the test. I make a long story short, I took the test, scored the highest, and did get a chance to enter the Naval Academy. And it's one of the things. It's an opportunity. At times, I question just exactly how much of an opportunity it was. It was a tough 4 years there, but it was an opportunity. And one of the things that it gave me, and this applies to so many who got into the military, I was lucky in the fact that I spent 4 years at a military school. So, and while you're there at the school, you're doing a standard and basically engineering education. But along with that, since it was a military school, you learn leadership. You learn how to take care of your people that might serve under you. You learn an awful lot of lessons about how things properly done can really serve you best in your career in the military. And that really made sense to me. And it was a message that I carried along as I went through, graduated from the academy. We had the opportunity. 8% of the class was allowed to go Marine Corps, and so I applied for that position and got my commission in the Marine Corps instead of the Navy, and started a series of training evolutions. I went to Quantico to basic school because going into the Marine Corps, and I had some excellent leaders at the Naval Academy. And they happened to be, most of them were Marines. I just happened to favor that. I like to joke about it. I like the uniforms better too, but that's another story. So I had opted to go to Quantico, to basic school, and I really wanted to come out as a platoon leader, a combat infantry type platoon leader. I'd also, as I was making my choices, I said, well, I'd like an aviation option. So perhaps after a few years of serving in the infantry, I could go ahead and go through flight training. Well, that was 1964-65. Vietnam was heating up. I actually served 2 months as a platoon leader there at Quantico, and then and this was one of the opportunities. You get the call from headquarters, Marine Corps. All right, we need pilots. We need pilots now. Go now or forever hold your peace. So I made the transition, then went down to Pensacola and started in flight training. And the advantage of that and the opportunity that was associated with that is, okay, so now I've had 4 years of military school, 6 months of basic school. I'm going to end up going through 18 months of flight training in order to, before I'm really assigned to an operational unit. And one of the things that, and I hope some people in the audience at least will appreciate this, that was 6 years of military experience before I went to Vietnam. And I'll tell you what, the people that my heart has always gone out to, and I had folks like this working for me when I was in Vietnam, but those of you who went right from high school and 6 months later found yourself in combat in Vietnam, that was a tough pull. I'm so thankful for the opportunity I had where I got that experience and had a basic background for it, and I think it prepared me a little bit more for some of the things that we encountered in Vietnam. When I finished up with flight training, I actually wanted to go into fly the F-8, which was kind of an older airplane. I was a little bit disappointed when I got assigned to an F-4 squadron, but it was actually a good deal. So I went from midshipman there in very short order, went through flight training. It was an interesting aspect, and I know this is when I realized it was cut out for me, because one of my best friends going through flight training, like many of the folks I was training with, had a private pilot's license. He had about 300 hours as a private pilot before he ever got into flight training. But it always frustrated him because I always came out first in the class. And I can't actually tell you why that was, but for some reason I just took to the aviation aspect of it. As I was mentioned to Greg the other day, I should have been born with wings, because I just seemed to be able to adapt to that. So graduated and went to my first squadron, flying F-4s out of Cherry Point, North Carolina, and went very quickly through the progression of leadership from just joining the squadron, being a wingman, flying with somebody else's lead, and over time upgrading to the point. By the time I finished up at Cherry Point, I was a division leader, so I actually had, and this still astounds me when I think back at it. So there I am, I'm 22 years old, I'm being entrusted with, let's see, F-4 at that point in time cost about, round numbers, $50 million, and I was given 4 of them with the crews to be able to command. Not many 22-year-olds have that in the background. So, and one of the interesting things, and again, this is the opportunity side of it, while I was there going through my training in Cherry Point, North Carolina, we had an opening come up. We needed somebody to go into training as the landing signal officer. Now, those who have seen any aircraft carrier movies, the landing signal officer is the guy who stands on the fantail. That's the rear of the ship for the Army guys. Appreciate that, Greg. Okay, so stand on the fantail of the ship. And in the old days, World War II, they actually had paddles, and they would help the pilots get into a landing position through the use of the paddles and talking microphone device. Today we do that all electronically, but then we retain the name paddles. And I was in training, and my senior LSO that I was training under had a car accident, was taken out of action, and I ended up as the group LSO as a first lieutenant, which caused me to spend an awful lot of time standing on the back of very big boats looking at airplanes coming on. It also had another effect, and this goes back to a little bit of what I was talking about before, because what it did is, since I was the group LSO by definition now, instead of going to Vietnam after 6 months of training and about, I would say the average pilot at that point in time in the Marine Squadron was going with about 125 hours of flight time to Vietnam. Well, in addition to the staying for a 6 months longer period of time because I was the LSO, I'm also what they refer to as a flight time hog. If there was an opportunity to take a flight, I'd jump on it. So nights when some people rather go to the bar than take a flight, I'm like, hey, I'll take your flight. So at the end of a year when I got my orders finally to go to Vietnam, instead of going over there with 125 flight hours and about 50% trained, I had 300 hours of flight time, and it was 100% trained when I went to Vietnam. And again, I'm building this picture for you because it's what allowed me to just put things in a little bit different perspective in the tours that I had in Vietnam. And I knew something different was going to happen when at that point in time, we were going over on individual orders. Earlier in the era, you would have a whole squadron go over en masse, which was kind of nice. The people that you'd worked with, flown with, the same command structure and all that. Well, that stopped in the 67 time frame, and you went on individual orders. So I took the commercial jet over, landed in Da Nang after a few stops en route, and got off the airplane, and the Marine Corps admin folks met us there, and they went down a list of names and said, okay, get on the bus and we'll pick you up tomorrow morning and take you to headquarters and give you your assignments. Well, they hadn't called my name. And I was just about to ask one of the officers there what was going on. He says, is Lieutenant Springer here? Yep, I'm here. Okay, he said, get on the helicopter, you're going to Chu Lai. I'm like, how did I get pulled out of that lineup to go? Not that there was any real difference. I didn't know where Chu Lai was, by the way, but there was no real difference in the assignment. And I found out pretty quickly when I got to Chu Lai, my old commanding officer was now the commanding officer of the squadron in Chu Lai, and he had picked me out by name to get in his squadron, which is no small benefit as far as that goes. So I started flying in combat missions out of it. It's worked into it easily. They try and give you the easier type things to do, and always sending you out with a more experienced pilot as you learn the ropes and learn what the dangers are that you may incur as you're going flying. One of my fairly early flights, it was going to be an interesting mission. We were actually going over to a very hot spot, the Ashland Valley, on the border between Cambodia, Thailand, and Vietnam. This is where the Viet Cong were bringing supplies down all the way from North Vietnam all the way down to Saigon. And it was a hotbed, a lot of enemy fire over there. And my lead pilot, who the two airplanes were configured slightly differently, he had a load of bombs of what we call napalm, the incendiary bombs, and I had the iron bombs that we typically use during that period of time. And here was his theory. So he was going to come in with his napalm, and he would make the first bomb run, and he would drop his napalm, and I would be right behind him, and that would keep the enemy, they would have fired at him, but they'd be concentrating on him, and I would less likely to get hit by fire from the ground fire. And I knew a little bit about napalm, and one of the things that happens when you drop that liquid gelid gasoline is it sucks the oxygen out of the air. And I said, so what if I'm too close? And he says, no, I'll just drop one at a time, and we will, and that won't be a problem. He knew the numbers, and he knew that would work to be able to drop one at a time. So we came around the first pass. That worked beautifully. He went in. I was maybe just like 300 yards behind him, and he dropped his napalm, and hopefully the guy stopped shooting. And that worked. We pulled around, came back for another bomb run. The second bomb run, he dropped them all, and that made for a very large explosion down on the ground, and it sucked the oxygen out of the air. I'm still right behind him, about 300 feet back, and when I hit that basically dead airspace, both my engines flamed out. So there I am, 200 miles from home, as they say, with running out of airspeed and altitude all at the same time. Fortunately, the F-4 is a fantastic airplane. I had enough speed to get through the nape cloud. Both engines were unwinding, but executed the emergency procedure and got both engines both relit, and actually continued to make my. He had no more ordnance on board, so he'd just make a dive, and then I'd follow him and drop my ordnance. So again, a bit of luck perhaps, maybe a little bit of intuition about what's going on, but a really more exciting flight than I had ever anticipated that would be. Continued going back and forth, and again, I mentioned to you I was kind of a flight time hog, and this is the opportunity side of it. It's also the advantage of having, like you say, almost 6 years of military experience to look at what was going on. And I realized that the flying was incredible. It was incredibly dangerous, but it was incredibly exciting. I mean, it was on top of everything else. I like to refer to it. I'm borrowing something from the Navy Top Gun school. There are no points for second place. Nobody got a trophy for participating. You had to be there. You had to do it. You had to get the job done. And I liked getting the job done. I felt like I was really fulfilling the role that the years of military experience and education had prepared me for. So when some of the guys would rather, I had a standing offer in the ready room, you want to go and get a beer, I'll take your flight. And so I did that. So at the end of 6 months, where the average, again, at that point in time, if you had, at the end of a year, if you had 125 combat missions in Vietnam, that was a big number. And in 6 months, I had a little over 300 combat missions in Vietnam. So I was flying. In fact, if you break that down, you realize I was, on the average, flying twice a day to do those missions. So it really it was something that I just felt entirely comfortable with. My wife may not have agreed 100% with my philosophy, but it was what I wanted to do. Being at Chu Lai, we were actually far enough out of the range of Da Nang and all that we tended to. Anybody here was ever stationed in Da Nang? Just like okay, we guys were a little safer in Da Nang, not much, but a little bit safer than we at that point in time, particularly in the '67 time frame. We were getting a lot of rocket attacks and mortar attacks. The field frequently came under fire. I can remember coming back and the field was closed because there was an active fight going on around the field, and we'd either bingo up to Da Nang or at worst case go over to Cambodia or to Cambodia to land. So it was things were pretty tough on the ground, and I had started just my personal philosophy of when I came back from a flight, I would always take the time and talk to the plane captain, talk to the ordnance men who were out there. I was working in maintenance, so I'd get, and as it turns out, I was probably the only pilot in the squadron who actually took the time to do that. I really felt, the troops, the guys who were turning the wrenches, loading the bombs, doing all that kind of stuff, the only time they saw combat was when the 122 millimeter rockets were inbound, and that's the wrong end of the combat thing. So as a way of trying to improve morale and keep them involved in it, because they were working the same long hours. 12-hour days were nothing. So taking the time to make sure that the guys I worked with, the troops that were doing all the real hard work of it to keep the airplanes flying was very important to me, and they seemed to really appreciate the fact that I was doing that. One of the secondary jobs I had, and this comes into the flight time hog thing again, I was also what they call the maintenance test pilot. So when you got an airplane that needed some work on it, and if it involved critical controls or whatever, you always had to do called a post-maintenance check flight, and I was the guy who did that. We had one airplane that had some fairly serious problems, and I had actually flown 4 check flights on the airplane, but we continued to have, get up to about 40,000 feet, we get a fire warning light. Well, we knew there was no fire, well, at least not where there wasn't supposed to be. But there was no fire on the airplane. But we still had to get that problem solved. And as it turns out, a lot of times we reserved those kinds of test flights for Sunday. It wasn't truly a day off, but kind of. There was less activity on Sunday. So Sunday was a day devoted to the test flight, and I was getting ready. Now this is going to be the 5th time I was going to fly the airplane. In this case, I was flying the F4. Let's see if there we go. There's my favorite airplane up there, loaded down wing to wing, wingtip to wingtip with ordnance. In this case, though, it had nothing on the airplane. It was just what we call a clean airplane, and it accelerates really, really well. And I was getting ready to go out and fly it, and a couple of the guys in maintenance came over to me and said, hey Skipper, is there any chance you could do there's not much activity in the field, any chance you could do a high performance takeoff, a max performance takeoff? Well, let's see, it's a 10,000 foot runway. All right, yeah, that sounds good. I said, I said, get out there with your cameras and whatever, and we'll see what happens. So they got out there, and I taxied out the runway, got as far down to the end because I wanted all 10,000 feet. It got airborne very quickly, and by the time I hit the end of the runway, I was doing about 450 miles per hour. I stood the airplane on its tail, it arced up, did an Immelman over the field. And it was beautiful. It came back. I went out and did the test flight. It turns out that we'd gotten rid of the fire warning light. So far, so good, right? Okay. Came back and landed. It's a welcoming party waiting for me. Well, as it turns out, despite having cleared with the tower to do the max performance takeoff, what they didn't tell me is the Army had a brigadier general that was arriving about the same time. And when I rotated in the overrun, I was doing about 500 knots by the time I hit the end of that runway, and just put it right on its tail. Blew dirt and sand and all that stuff all over the general and his welcoming party. I didn't consider that my finest moment, exactly. In fact, when I came back, I was escorted to the commanding officer's office, and he started off with, "You're grounded. What were you thinking? Oh, by the way, you're under house arrest." I'm like, okay, well, so much for a career in the Marine Corps, and kept me under house arrest for, he kept me under house arrest. He had to return me to flight status because I was the only one qualified to lead a fighter sweep up. We had a fighter sweep going up to North Vietnam the next day, and I was the only one who had the qualification to lead that. So I got back on flight status, and then, as it turns out, all those guys I'd been working with down the flight line, the ordnance guys and all that, they found out that I had been put under house arrest, and they rebelled, and they said, we're going to stop. They told the CEO that is, unless you turn Bob Springer loose, we're going to stop fixing airplanes. As they said in the Top Gun movie, gutsy move, Mav. You know. The CEO came to me and said, "Are you behind this?" No, sir, I'm not. I said, "It's I can't control how those guys feel down there. I know how they feel. I can't control it." And so, well, you've got to do something. So I went back, got the maintenance troops together, and said, "Look, I appreciate it. It's the wrong thing to do. We have sorties. We need to get out the next day. So please, go back to work." And they did. And I waited a couple of weeks, and I was still under house arrest, but I could fly. It wasn't like you were going to go to the beach and surf or something like that. So at any rate, being under house arrest was not that big a deal. Kept me out of the bar too, so that was not a terribly bad thing. And at the end of that time, and this was not the same CEO that had pulled me into the squadron, by the way. That CEO went on to be a 3-star general in the Marine Corps. But this guy was not a great leader, and you can tell that by the troops didn't respect him at all either. So it was kind of a bad situation. And he called me into his offices. He says, I just don't know what to do with you. He says, so I'm going to bump it up on you. You get to go to the full colonel, the group commander, and whatever he decides is what I'll back. I said, okay. So I had to show up a couple days later in the group commander's office, full Class A uniform, and stood at attention. At ease. No, at ease. Go ahead. Stand easy. He said, so tell me your side of the story. And I did. And I kind of told him the whole thing about how I felt about it. And he said, would you do it again? I said, yes, sir, I would. He says, why? He says, you wouldn't believe how good morale is down there on the flight line right now. The troops they're breaking their backs to get the job done. And if that's what it takes to something like that, to get the boost in morale and keep the whole machine operating properly, I would certainly do that. So kept flying. Had about a third of my missions were up over North Vietnam, and some of those were extremely long. And we'd take off out of Chu Lai, go over to the border of Thailand, and in-flight refuel, go up, fly a couple hours up along the Hai Phong, Hanoi area looking for MiGs, and go back and refuel, come back and do it again. So sometimes 7-8 hour flight cycles to be able to do our mission, and that was all going along just well, and we really were accomplishing, I felt like, a lot during a very, very difficult time during the war. Not long after that, though, it's one of those opportunity calls that you don't want to get, and the CO had actually changed, so it was a new commanding officer. Turns out, by the way, just as a footnote to all this, is in my whole record, it never bothered me one bit. No, there was never any mention in my official record about my little malfeasance that took place there over the field, which was good. That helped me to continue my career in the Marine Corps. But I got orders, and they were going to transition me. I was going to go up and be the U.S. Marine Corps advisor to the Korean Marine Corps in Vietnam. Well, that's interesting. Most people don't realize it. We are the Koreans were our allies. Let's see if we can get this next slide up here. There we go. Well, it's tough to see the one on the top, but actually it's about halfway between Da Nang and Chu Lai, and a little further west. So we were out in the jungle for about 6 months up there, and helping the Koreans do their job of patrolling and all that. Had one exciting experience with that. I had a platoon of Amtraks, as well as the working with the Korean Marines, as well as our air control people, and one of the Amtraks in going out on patrol had been hit by, it wasn't an IED, it was a command detonated mine, and we had to mount a rescue team to go out, and actually we ran from our battalion area about a mile, and we were able to put some suppressing fire down enough to get the troops pulled out of the Amtrak, get a helicopter in to medevac them, and get them safely back to a field hospital. Well, speaking of helicopters, that time I was with the Korean Marines, those of you who've been on the ground, I hope I say this in a correct order. You know, you're rarely busy. I mean, there are periods of time where you'll be very, very busy in combat. You've got a lot of things to go on, and then there'll be down periods where you're kind of getting ready for the next operation. And during those down periods, we were constantly being supplied by helicopters, and a couple of the helicopter pilots I ran into were guys that I had gone through flight training with. So I said, hey, is there any chance that you guys could come out and I could fly co-pilot with you in the Hueys? And they said, sure. So we set that up. It turns out we never got it approved, but we set it up, and they would come out. And they were always glad. They were always short pilots, and they were always glad to have somebody else in the seat. And after one or two iterations of that, of flying along, and I think if we had, if the pilot had been shot, I think I probably could have landed it. I'm not sure, but he was thinking. They were thinking ahead of it, and said, "Hey, as long as you're flying, you may as well learn how to fly this thing." So in combat, I learned how to fly the Huey, and I ended up flying another couple hundred missions in Hueys back and forth. And as it turns out, none of that ever showed up in my record book. So fast forward a couple of years, I'm getting another one of those opportunity calls from headquarters Marine Corps. And you know, I like this. I tried to use this with the kids, and I knew they wouldn't understand it, so I didn't go too far with it. But all the military guys for sure in the room is, you know, when you get a call from headquarters Marine Corps and you say, we've got an opportunity for you, you're already too late to hang up the phone. You know, it's just, you just never know what those opportunities are going to be like. So I was in a staff position at that time, and he said, well, turns out in your year group, we're short helicopter pilots. Now you got to remember, none of my helicopter time shows up in official records. So we're short helicopter pilots, and we're going to take 50 people out of your year group and transition you from jets to helicopters. Well, that wasn't exactly what I had in mind to do as the next opportunity. And I said, well, but, you know, I'm pretty good at math. I said, so how, you said you're going to take 50 people out of my year group. How many people are in my year group? 51. Okay, I got that. So there's like a less than 2% chance that I won't get selected. So the opportunist that I am, I said, well, if I volunteer, what will you give me? He said, well, we'll give you a choice of helicopter and give you a choice of duty station. Well, I was at El Toro, and I wanted to go down to Camp Pendleton. So I said, I volunteer, went down to Camp Pendleton, and again, remembering that this stuff isn't in my record book, and the commanding officer of the squadron down there says, hey, we're going to have to send you back to Pensacola for 6 to 9 weeks to train in the helicopter. I said, I didn't want to blow my cover entirely, so I said, you know, what's the chance that you just give me an instructor and let me go out and fly and see how I do? And he says, okay, that's fine. The instructor, we went out and after about 5 minutes, like getting back on a bicycle, I was back in the helicopter world and flying just fine. Came back and the skipper said, well, how did he do? He says, boss, you wouldn't believe it, but for a jet jockey, that guy is the most natural helicopter pilot I've ever met in my life. So, you know, got back into helicopters, and that figured into my second tour as I went back. Some in Okinawa with the division, and then some going over offshore and flying off the helicopter carriers for some missions in Vietnam during the '73 time frame. But it was an interesting juncture in the road. Going back that first tour, I had probably the most exciting mission I had and the most fulfilling. And this was alluded to. I did get a Distinguished Flying Cross on one particular mission. And people, if you ever run into somebody in the military and they're looking for a Bronze Star, looking for a DFC or whatever, stay away from them because they're going to get themselves killed. So that wasn't my thing, but we were assigned to a mission, and turns out it was up at Khe Sanh. Those that are familiar with the Vietnam scenario, that was one of the hot spots in the I Corps area up north, surrounded by not just the Viet Cong, but by the North Vietnamese Army up there. And anybody serve at Khe Sanh? Just out of curiosity. Oh, bless you, sir. That was, am I right? A bit of a hot spot. So we'd come up, and there was a platoon-size patrol that had gone out and really gotten ambushed by the North Vietnamese regulars. And they had tried to get support aircraft in, but the cloud cover was too. Khe Sanh is up in the mountains, and the cloud cover you couldn't penetrate through the clouds. You're likely to run into one of those granite clouds out there. So people were unable. We were like the third or fourth flight that had been asked to come in, but the clouds hadn't cleared, and we were about to go back. Says, you know, a couple weeks ago I was up in this area, and I'd come in actually from the west. And as I recall, there's a way, if you really get down in the valleys, with a little luck, we can wind our way up into the Khe Sanh area. So my wingman and I did that. I got up in the area and were able to get in contact with forward air controller that was up there, locate the platoon, and go ahead and weaving in and out of the clouds as we made our bomb runs, we were able to suppress the fire enough that they were able to get a couple of helicopters in and extract the platoon. So a very demanding mission, and it just highlights. I don't really think I can call that an opportunity from that standpoint, other than it was an opportunity, despite a bit of risk, to go ahead and hopefully they got the whole platoon. A couple of the folks were wounded, but none in the platoon that that was being ambushed died as a result of that. So it was an opportunity. Oh, excuse me. You have is there a little bottle with? I'm not getting choked up. I'm just choking. Sorry. So I managed to finish up that tour and go on. While I was with the Koreans, had a chance to fly the Bird Dog. And excuse me. In fact, on your patch board over here, it's the only place I've ever seen what we call the kimchi organization, and we were the forward air controllers flying O-1 Bird Dogs that helped support the troops and call in actually the support aircraft. So had a good chance to do that. Next slide up there. Again, flew the helicopters for a couple of years, both Hueys and Cobras, and it was a great opportunity. Interesting enough, as far as airplanes to fly, I loved the F-4. It was an absolutely fantastic airplane to fly. But when it came to actually working as we were designed to do in the Marine Corps, remembering I started out by saying, no matter what your job is, everything was in support of the riflemen out there in the front lines. and you just felt a lot more part of that operation and organization when that was taking place. I've been criticized some by when I've talked to people about how I felt about flying the missions and all that. Again, an opportunity to do what I was trained to do, and I think you figured out by now is a quote from Theodore Roosevelt that I just absolutely love. Far better it is to dare mighty things, to win glorious triumphs, and even though checkered by failure, than to rank with those timid souls who neither enjoy or suffer much because they live in the gray twilight that knows neither victory nor defeat. And one of the good things about that is that clearly I am not one of those timid souls, and the life lessons that I learned going through that period of time, being able to certainly put myself at risk as many in the room have. Great opportunity. Came back, continued my aviation career, had a chance to go through the Top Gun school. The movie got it pretty close to right, so Top Gun was an exciting standpoint. And then finished up, well, pretty much by the end of my airplane career. I went through the Navy Test Pilot School, and got to fly test airplanes. Very, very demanding role. The basic thing of a test pilot, you go out and you do something in an airplane that nobody's ever done before. There were a few hazardous moments in all that as well. I was very fortunate, of course, after serving a variety of different tours, went back and got a graduate degree courtesy of the Marine Corps, and ended up eventually applying for the astronaut program and being selected to do that. A dangerous mission also. Timid souls don't make it there, but gosh, at least they weren't shooting at you, so it was pretty rewarding. So I certainly, from my standpoint, a fulfilling career. My hat's off to each and every veteran in here. I don't care what period of time you served. Just being in the military is a huge accomplishment and a huge thing. Like JFK said, ask not what the country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. I'd like to think I fulfilled that role. Thank you very much.
Anybody got any questions?
I'll be happy to take any questions. I don't usually get too beat up on that subject, but I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have about any of that or anything related. No takers.
Did you encounter any MiGs?
I encountered one MiG, and he is going the other direction. As a fighter pilot, that was almost like the creme de la creme, is being able to tangle with the MiGs, and of course I would have won. But being able to tangle with the MiGs, I caught one. I was about 10 miles in trail, and I never did catch up with him, and he flew over the China board, and we couldn't pursue him. So now, never had that. Wanted to, but never did. Anything else? Well, it's been a long evening, but thank you so very much for being patient, listening to my version of the Vietnamese War, and thank you again, all veterans. Thank you for serving and for supporting this great nation of ours. Peace.
Okay, Greg?
Can you hear me in the back? We certainly want to thank Bob Springer, as I've gotten to know him, to join with us this evening. Bob, as a token of our appreciation, please accept this print of a painting entitled Going Home, painted by Marine combat artist Robert Kent Halliday, a 1950s graduate also of Ashland High School. It depicts what we believe to be the finest artistic impression of the fallen soldier being lifted by angels as he or she is going home, with his combat gear falling off as the angels are lifting him to heaven. The original painting of this is currently housed in the Ashland County Historical Society. I invite you to go see it if you have an opportunity. As each one of you leave here this evening, when you leave through these doors, there'll be an individual on either side of the hallway who will be handing you a smaller print of the painting that I've just referred to, a copy of which is in your program this evening, that will perhaps remind each of you of a fallen soldier who has previously been taken home. Bob, on behalf of all of us, here is your copy of the painting.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I appreciate it. Appreciate it.
Okay, now I want to introduce someone who needs little introduction in our community, and that's our great mayor of Ashland and Ashland City, Mayor Matt Miller.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, God bless the United States military, past, present, and future. You need to take a moment and you need to look around at the faces at your table. Look at the faces at your table and look across the room. I know you don't have this view that I have of all of your faces, but the truth is, when you look into the eyes of those people sitting at your table, no matter what their age, no matter how they served, no matter where they served, or even if they served, we're all history makers. We're all history makers. Every day, through our words and our actions and our attitudes, we are helping shape history, not just in our families and in our community, but across our country and our world. We all have unique opportunities to shape our history, but every one of us matter. You matter tonight, and we're glad that you're here so that we can honor you. But when you take a look across all of history, and you consider all of the men and women who have roamed across this globe, do you realize only 644 have ever been to space? And out of that 644 that have been to space, only 339 have come from the great United States of America. 339 men and women out of all humankind from our great country. But consider this. In the state of Ohio, all of those tens and millions of people that have been here throughout our history since 1803, only 25 have ever visited space. And consider for just a moment, in the great city of Ashland, Ohio, only one of us has ever seen the earth from high above. We're proud of you, Colonel Springer. We're very proud of you. And we're even more proud of the fact that you haven't forgot your hometown that helped shape you into the hero that you have become and continue to be. You're certainly a light for all that is good and kind and gentle and humble, and it shines through everything you do. And maybe that'll even be part of the best of your legacy that you leave behind. But tonight, we want to do something that we've never done before. So I'm going to ask Mr. Bob DeSanto and Mr. Carl Reichert if they will join me up here at the podium. And Colonel Springer, if you want to make your way back up here.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
some things, and some contributions are worth remembering for all posterity. And so with that in mind, we would like to present to you, however we're going to keep it, this monument that will be erected at the campus of the Ashland City Schools at the high school, and will forever honor you, Colonel Robert Springer, but even more importantly, hopefully serve as an inspiration to every child that comes through the hallways of that school, so that they will know anything on earth is possible, in fact, anything on earth and maybe even in space. Congratulations, Colonel Springer.
Thank you very much.
It's going to be at a pedestal.
Yes. The monument will be mounted on a permanent pedestal at a location here at our Ashland High School. And we want to thank the school board and our superintendent, Steve Paramore, for authorizing us to do this. And we also want to thank Zach Carter, who represents one of our community's veterans organizations, and the Norma Foundation for helping us fund this permanent monument in your honor and to inspire future generations. So thank you, Colonel Springer.
Well, thank you very much.
We're going to keep it up front here if any of you want to come and see it.
And I'll be up front in case anybody that wanted to ask a question, but then I'll stay up here if you want to talk for a bit.
You know, one thing we need to mention. Did you mention the probation society? Did you?
Thank you, sir.
In just a minute, Bob's going to come up here and say a few things, but before he does, there's a couple of things that I want to let you know before we get out of here. For all the ladies in the room, on your way out, there are carnations over here, and every lady will leave with a carnation in her hand tonight from the program. And for all the veterans in the room, our representative Melanie, she's brought a bunch of benefit resource guides for veterans from Ohio. So this has a lot of information for you guys. So there's some of those up here for you to take with you. And Bob's going to finish the program out in just a second. You ready? But for me, this is kind of an honor for me to be involved in this every year. And I just want all of you guys to know, and gals that are in here, I feel like I'm leaving a better person because of you. Thank you.
Bring that down a little bit. It's wonderful that you're all here and honoring Colonel Springer. I want you to look at the pamphlet that is on your table. That, if you look on the back, you're going to see a photograph of a young Robert Springer receiving a Distinguished Flying Cross, I believe, for a mission that he had did, I think, and he talked about tonight. But that is a real signature. Colonel Springer signed 330 of these. I think he has carpal tunnel syndrome from that. But anyway, I want you to think about this. Colonel Springer has signed, as an astronaut, thousands and thousands of mementos. But he has never signed a picture of him receiving this award. You are the only ones in America that have such a memento. And so I would encourage you to be sure and take one of these with you. It's got some good information. I'd like to thank the secretaries that worked so hard at my office to put this together. It's really a special pamphlet, one that you may want to hand down to your children. The other thing I want to say here, on a serious note, we're celebrating this because the Vietnam War supposedly was over in 1975. But you understand something, that is not quite true. And this tonight is a proof that it didn't end in 1975. And every Vietnam veteran understands that. The Vietnam War was in phases. There was the advisory phase, there was the big troop movement phase, there was Tet 1, Tet 2, Spring Offensive, Fall Offensive. And that's over now. But when these veterans put on that uniform, they started on a voyage that they are still on. That voyage isn't over. It's changed. The phase has changed. Now it's an Agent Orange change. Now it may be cancer change. Now it may be other disabilities. But we are still on that voyage. And that is why this room is full of veterans. To come here and hear Robert Springer speak. And they didn't come here to hear about being an astronaut. They came here to hear about him being a fellow Vietnam veteran. I want to thank all the veterans that are here, and for everyone to understand. And it's not just the veterans; it's their families, it's their mothers, their fathers, their wives. The many wives could tell. I'm telling you, very harrowing stories. I think from some of the men in this room. Not all, but some. So, on that somber note, I do want to say that take one of these with you, and at each table you will see a beautiful, I think, plant. And this was a plant that was donated, I believe, by Home Depot, free for us. So you thank Home Depot when you go out there. And each one of those plants is going home with the oldest person at each table. Now, you're going to have to figure out how that goes. And one thing I noticed, there's an awful lot of old men in this room. And a lot of pretty young ladies on their arms. So having said that, when you leave tonight, so it'll be up to each table to figure that one out. When you leave tonight, don't forget, ladies, you're getting a beautiful carnation. You're also getting the Robert Halliday print, which people will be handing to you. And am I missing anything else that they're going to be receiving? Take the candy. And we want to thank everybody that participated. God bless all of you. And Melanie, would you come up and give us, who wants to sing God Bless America?
All right, friends, would you please stand with me? This is a great way to close the evening with this prayer. Would you please join me in singing God Bless America? God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans, white with foam.